This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. After experiencing trauma, I went to therapy, and my therapist guided me through a difficult time in my life. They helped me understand what was happening and provided me with tools to cope and find my own strength and resilience. Their experience and compassion were invaluable and enabled me to rebuild my life and move forward. I strongly believe in the power of therapy to help people through difficult times. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/resilience. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/resilience or choose podcast, then Notes on Resilience during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month.
As those of you who are here in charge, in leadership, listening to all of these stories and seeing how your folks are dealing with certain things, what are you going to do from here? Because this is the first step, is opening up and sharing. What are you going to do to continue the healing process?
Hello, and welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chilinsky. My guest today is Ricardo Martinez. He's a storyteller, author, and host and creator of Within the Trenches, true stories from 911 dispatchers who live them, a podcast based on the experience of being a 911 dispatcher. He himself was a 911 dispatcher, and he also started the I Am 911 movement. We had an amazing conversation about public safety and being a dispatcher, as well as the importance of resiliency and taking care of yourself. I think you're going to really enjoy the episode. Find Notes on Resilience on Apple Podcasts and subscribe. And if you like the show, we'd love for you to leave a review. Or if you're interested, I've also got a Google form where I'm looking for feedback from my listeners, what you like about the show, what you wish we do differently. We're prepping for the 2024 shows, and I want to know what works and what's not working for you guys. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoy this episode. Ricardo, I'm so excited to be talking to you today. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Now, the first question I ask all my guests, if you could have any superpower in the world, or even out of this world, what would it be?
To stop time.
Oh, okay.
Right. Yes.
I feel like there's a story there.
You know, there's just so much that goes on in the day where you kind of really want to have at least an hour or two extra to be able to get certain things done and then hit play again, and boom, you don't have to worry about whatever that was, and you can just continue on.
Oh, I love it. All right. I have heard some of the most amazing superpowers. I want to put them all together and make a superhero, maybe is the word I'm looking for.
That's pretty awesome. I dig that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for sharing. I love that one. And now as we dive in, tell us, who are you and what is it that you do that has you and I talking about resiliency today?
So for 13 years, I was a 911 dispatcher and supervisor. Mm-hmm. And during my time there, I ended up kind of hitting a burnout, like a lot of people do in this profession, or in a lot of professions, right? But for public safety, at a certain time, sometimes people hit that burnout. And I was struggling with a lot of my phone calls that I was taking. During this time, there's not a lot of resources out there. Not a lot of people were talking about this. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of buried my calls. So everything I do for a living now started from that struggle. So I run Within the Trenches media, And it's based around a podcast that I started while I was in dispatch called Within the Trenches, True Stories from the 911 Dispatchers Who Live Them. I'm also the founder of the I Am 911 movement, which was a movement that was started originally to raise awareness to reclassification for 911 dispatchers from the clerical class through the Office of Management and Budget to the protective class with police, fire, EMS, and all of that. But it quickly turned into peer support, where we were sharing all of these stories out there to give everyone out in the field of public safety, but especially those in the general public, a look at what it is like for us when we take phone calls, just a glimpse into a call. So that's everything that I do now. I'm also a speaker at different conferences, and I recently published a book called Imagine Listening. But in the beginning, that's where it all started, was from my time in dispatch.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for the work that you are doing now and the work that you did as a dispatcher. As someone not in public safety, as a civilian, I think we don't necessarily think about what is it like for the person on the other end of the phone when we call on one of the worst moments of our lives. What is it like for the person who is on the other end of the phone, remaining calm to our ears, but taking in this whole story? So thank you and all of the dispatchers for the work that you guys do.
Thank you. It was the same way for me in the sense where I would go to get my hair cut. And always you got that small talk that's getting started, right? You want to break the ice, so it's not just awkward. For me, actually, it's kind of therapeutic in a way. Just sitting there, it's relaxing, just to have my hair cut done. But, someone would ask, what do you do for a living? And I would think, do I say? And the reason is because the question always comes out, what's the craziest call you've ever taken? Or what's the worst call you've ever taken? And in the beginning, for me, and I'll be honest, it was almost annoying a way, only because I thought I don't want to have to relive this. However, I ended up switching that mindset because I thought humans are curious, right? That's the way we are. We're genuinely curious. And why not turn this into public education? So without going into a lot of deep detail with those who are cutting my hair or just simply asking, what do you do for a living? I ended up letting people know, so that they would know what it was like for us, that we're not just answering the phone, that even though I'm calm, cool, and collected, in the back of my mind, I'm freaking out right there with you.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. You said something really interesting that I want to just quickly make sure we mention before I start asking you my other questions. You mentioned 911 dispatchers and operators, and I guess two questions. Can you clarify, is there a difference between a dispatcher and a 911 operator?
So it all depends really on the agency, because there are folks that are just for call taking, and then there are those who are just dispatching. So there's two different ways to look at it, but normally we're not seen as, it's more so telecommunicators. Okay. They're trying to change that, because if you type that word into a Google search or anything like that, it's not in the dictionary. It's not a real word, really. For years, that's what 911 dispatchers have been called. We just usually say 911 professionals or just 911 dispatch as a whole. But in some places, there are call takers and there are some places that are dispatching. I have to clarify to not say just a dispatcher, because people always say stuff and that's not what it's meant. We're just trying to clarify the right words, right? Because, as you asking this as well, a lot of people don't know. And because it's different in other agencies, right? Usually we just say 911 professional or 911 dispatch just to encompass all of it. Yeah. And you also mentioned something that is, I think, very important in the public safety industry. You mentioned that 911 professionals are sometimes in some places considered clerical workers, not first responders like the police and fire. And how does that impact you as professionals and the kind of support you're able to get? For a lot of years, dispatch has been left out of things. So, for example, you have a really hard call, multiple deaths, let's say from an accident or something, or a fire even. And all of public safety, all of the first responders, get to go to that.
Mm-hmm.
But they leave dispatch out because they don't view us as first responders because we're not actually on the scene. But technically, if you're just thinking about that term, we are the first responders. We're the ones who respond first, and we're there from the beginning to the end.
Yes.
Those that are going out there, the field responders, they're going after the fact. And we're the ones there taking it all in. Now, think about this as well. When I'm taking a phone call, let's just say it's an open line. I have my one ear trained to listen to everything that's going on in the background, in the environment of that call. And my other ear is paying attention to everything in the room, possibly talking to EMS or fire at the same time, typing everything in and then yelling over, depending on how big your agency is, yelling over some of the information and typing at the same time, but yelling it over so that the person on that main radio can get it to the officer or the responders as fast as possible. So all of this is going on at one time.
Wow. And yet in some places, I think still these professionals are not thought of as first responders, but as clerical workers. So if I'm understanding right, then you're not eligible perhaps for the peer support or the mental health support because there seems to be a lack of recognition of the mental health side of things for you guys.
For sure. Yeah. And on top of that, this goes through. So the Office of Management and Budget, they do this every 10 years with different classes for different occupations. And, a couple of big 911 organizations were trying to get that reclassified. Now, there are some states that have done this at the state level, but they're trying to do it at the federal level because, as you said, and you're correct, not all of the benefits are there. You can't pull extra benefits for mental health and wellness services. They're doing that out of whatever budgets they have, the state level. So there are some places that are doing it, but there are some that were there doing everything, but it's just not really being recognized, All
right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I know that a lot of people like yourself are working really hard to change that. And I could probably spend about an hour talking to you just on this topic. So I'm going to switch us over because I want to talk about resiliency. So thinking about your role and the things you've done as a professional, even, what do you think about the word resilience?
For me, the word resilience, it's a big word in public safety now. But when I had first started, we didn't really talk about it.
Okay.
At all, really. But for me, it's facing something head on, something hard head on, and coming back from it in any way possible, whether it be, for example, meditation or yoga or sharing your story, just simply sharing your story. To me, that is therapeutic and helps along with resilience. So for me specifically, let me tell you a quick story.
Okay.
2007, I was in dispatch and it's about 3 or 3:30 in the morning. My grandmother was living in the same county that I was dispatching for. She was living with an aunt of mine and she was in hospice care. And I knew that she was getting close. My family was sending me text messages, letting me know. And one of my coworkers ends up leaving to go to the break room. And she asked if I was okay, if I was good to catch phones. And I said, yeah, for sure. There's nothing going on anyway, which is almost a jinx in a way. You're like tempting fate, right? You're tempting fate by saying something like that. And as soon as the door's shut, the phone rings. Now, I've never hesitated to pick up the phone, especially in that job, right? The back of my hair on my neck starts standing up. Immediately, things felt different. And I look up at the screen as the call is coming in. And it's my mom's cell phone number. And I pick up the phone and ask 911, where's your emergency? And it's my cousin. And she says, Richie? And I said, yeah. And she goes, Grandma just died.
Oh.
And I took that call. Just for a long time, I thought, what are the odds? What are the odds that I would be the one to take that call? Now, it was poetic in a way. And I say this because from the time before my siblings and I were born, my grandmother was living with my parents. So she was literally there when I was born. Mm-hmm. So it just was meant to be that I would be there in the end for her.
Wow.
And for me, in resilience, in sharing my story, this is just one of those stories. to let other people know if they've had any similar situations that it's okay, that they're going to make it through. But we have to share these stories. We have to get it out and not bury it, because I did bury it at one time and it was not the way to go. So for me, it was sharing my story and talking to others about it.
Wow. Thank you. I got chills when you shared that story of being the one to answer the phone. When you talk about resilience, you do think a lot about storytelling, and you have a book, don't you?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So out of everything that I do, as I was talking about the I Am 911 movement, which was originally to raise awareness for reclassification, but quickly turned into peer support, this is how all of it came about. It's called Imagine Listening. And the reason I call it Imagine Listening, and the tagline for it as well, is your worst day is our everyday. And it's a compilation of the stories that were sent in anonymously, submitted for the I Am 911 movement. So these stories, because what I want is for people to do just what the title says, imagine listening to a call like this. The first story that I put out there for others to do the same was, I heard your last breath the night you flipped your four-wheeler. Hashtag I Am 911. And I asked others to share the similar stories.
Wow. It sounds such a powerful book, and we're going to link to it in the show notes for folks. You know, with all that you have learned and from your own experience and all of these stories that people are sharing with you and that you've included in the book, what do you think that people most misunderstand about trauma and how it impacts people?
The biggest things that people misunderstand is that it can happen to you. For me, for a long time, as I said before, you know, I buried that. I thought I was leaving those issues at work. I was just fooling myself, right? Yeah, I'm fine. And that's what happened, is that I would have these hard calls and my coworkers would say, "Are you okay?" And immediately I would say, "Yeah, I'm fine. Like, everything is fine," but it wasn't fine. I think that's one of those big things that people misunderstand, as I said, that it can happen to you. And sometimes we don't want to look at ourselves in the mirror and think, I have a problem or I have an issue. We're in denial a lot. Also, there's that stigma, right? You don't want to look weak. And I was one of those who I didn't want to look weak. I didn't want anyone to say, "Oh, Ricardo can't hack it." So I just tried to hide it. But then when I stopped caring what people might think about me asking for help, that was the game changer. That's when things changed, and it was therapeutic to share.
Wow. You know, as you were saying that, I'm curious your thoughts. Why do so many of us at certain times of our life think it's weak to show emotion, to ask for help, to show that we've been affected by something like this?
I almost feel like it's the embarrassment part of it. You don't want others to maybe shame you. It's almost, this is kind of out of nowhere, but it just popped in my head. But it's like when you're growing up and you had a birthday party and a bunch of people were invited, and you would think immediately, no one's going to come, no one's going to be here. And you've got that moment, that embarrassment that no one's going to be there for you. And maybe that's, in a sense, relatable, where we don't want to share or say anything or get help or whatever, because maybe someone is not going to be there for me, and that's going to hurt.
Yes, we have that need for connection. And maybe it's that anything that might make it seem like we're not connected or that you don't care about me, we just want to keep it inside. So you have, in your role as a dispatcher, and so many of our listeners I know are in the role of being helpers. And so you're working within our existing system to help people. But what do you think is the role of our systems or our institutions in helping people heal from trauma? Or maybe I even want to say in not further traumatizing us.
I think really it's being there for each other, that support. You know, Imagine Listening started as a conference session in public safety. So I speak at a lot of conferences. And what I wanted to try to do was get more of these stories out there. But I had developed this as a session where dispatchers would come in and they would sit there, would have this live audience. And for the first 30 minutes, they would have the chance to share some of their personal stories. And then, so it gets pretty emotionally intense in there. I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of tears, a lot of people hugging each other, like really getting it out. And it's an hour session, but that's only for the first 30 minutes because the last 30 minutes is called open mic. And that's where we share the funny stuff that happens in 911. So we start out emotionally intense and we end with laughter because laughter is good medicine. And at the end of it, people leave and they're talking to each other. Even if they are from different agencies, they're talking, they're sharing stories. But I bring this up as well because there was one session, or there's been several sessions, but there were directors and deputy directors in there. And I had said to them, as those of you who are here in charge, in leadership, listening to all of these stories and seeing how your folks are dealing with certain things, what are you going to do from here? Because this is the first step, is opening up and sharing. What are you going to do to continue the healing process? And I think the question that you posed there, I think that's one of the biggest things. Sharing is the first. But wherever leadership is, you got to listen. You have to listen to your folks. And where do you go from there to continue supporting?
Yes. And it sounds like from what you were saying earlier, some jurisdictions really are getting that message and they are providing the benefits and the support and the perhaps mental health counseling or peer support or other things. Do you feel like that's trending in the right direction across the country?
I believe so. There are a few centers out there, folks that I've spoken to who have said, I wish it was like that here. I wish we could, bring you out to do a session here. Or I wish we were doing more. But there are way more resources out there now than there was. So when I started Dispatch, it was 2001. When I started doing all of this stuff from 2007, from my grandmother's passing on, is when I really started doing this. So that burnout that I was talking about, I went back to school. All these big projects that I was doing had to do with dispatch because in, the setting of resilience as well, that was my way of also recapturing or reigniting that flame for what I was doing. I loved it, but there were so many other variables that was going on in that burnout that this helped with it. So it's been going on since then. And it's definitely pushing in the right way. From about 2016, I would say, to now, it's really been out there.
Okay. And I don't want you to certainly name check anybody here, but for organizations, specifically, public safety, dispatch, et cetera, that you feel aren't quite getting it yet, what is one or two changes they could make that would start moving in the right direction? And I guess before that, I want to ask, what do you think is the block from them moving in the right direction?
A lot of the organizations that I've been working with, they are definitely moving in the right direction. The only one that I could think of that maybe is not moving, that would just simply be the Office of Management and Budget. But the hard thing is, though, with them, when we're kind of talking about that reclassification, the hard part is they're looking for other things. They're looking for data. They're looking for policies and procedures. I mean, here's one thing alone that they're looking for, and that's simply the job description. Because the job description itself, some of them still read like there's clerical workers. So even that alone, and it's not just them, it's, I guess, all of us in a way where we have to update all of those, these policies and procedures. All of it needs to reflect everything the 911 professionals do now, not when it started in 1968. When it started in 1968, it was a completely different landscape. But now you've got video to 911 that's coming in. You have text to 911. There are pictures. And then you think about the trauma that comes from seeing certain things. Now, the good thing is that a lot of these tech companies, they do work with 911 agencies so that they can say simply, how do you want this stuff to come in? So that's a good thing. But if you do happen to see it, that's another layer that comes in.
Right. Because mostly until now, it's been audio, which I imagine is absolutely difficult in some circumstances. And then being able to have video evidence of what's going on, I cannot imagine doing that job. So Thank you to you and everyone who does this very difficult job. And I've heard 911 and dispatchers called the first responders because somebody's already taken first responders. So we'll make you the first responders. So what is an important lesson about resilience that you've learned because of the work that you did in dispatch and now that you're doing working with those organizations?
So there's a question that I always ask my guests, or even in person when I'm at a conference. And that question is, if you could go back in time with the knowledge that you have now to speak to yourself in the beginning of your career, your dispatching career, what would it be? And there have been a few people who have started to tear up to say, everything is going to be okay. You're going to be all right. Just keep at it. But for me, specifically, with everything that I've done, and with that question for me, it would be to get into meditation a lot sooner, because it was only the last year and a half that I got into it and really started digging into resilience and what it is and how I could do it for myself. Because those breathing techniques during some of those hard calls, oh my, that worked perfectly. I was able to center myself, and stay even more calm. And after the call, if I had a chance to breathe and sit there for a moment and reflect, those breathing techniques helped. And the other thing would have been yoga. Weird to say, but let me tell you a quick story, if I can, rather. Years ago in dispatch, again, that last year and a half that I was there, because I've been in public safety now for over 22 years, but dispatch, it was 13. So that last year and a half, I was dealing with some excruciating back pain, neck pain, and shoulder pain to the point where the pain was going into my temples. And I finally stopped caring about what people might think as I was asking for help. And I tried yoga. One session, that pain was gone. I ended up getting a phone call one night from a lady who was suicidal. And she was dealing with back, neck, and shoulder pain. And in those moments, and for me, I'm a firm believer that some of these phone calls are meant for us, that we might have some sort of life experience that will help in that situation better than any of our partners. Not that they wouldn't do a good job, but because I have that experience, I can help that person a little bit better. So I told her what I did, and we talked about yoga and what I did until help got there. At the end, she told me that she no longer wanted to kill herself because now there was another pathway. And she said, thank you. And I always think that, maybe that caller is out there as a yoga instructor somewhere helping someone else. But also, when I practice yoga, I think of that person.
Oh, I bet you do. That's such a powerful story. And I personally have benefited greatly from meditation and breathing exercises and yoga. So it resonates very much when you tell me how helpful those were to you as well. And I bet you have had similar experience where something is happening and it's very emotionally charged, and somehow you are the calm, you are the eye of the storm. And even in the moment, I'm thinking to myself, how am I calm right now?
Definitely. It works. It helps.
Talking about superpowers, those breathing exercises, I really do think can be a superpower, and one that we actually can access. We may not be able to stop time or fly, which is a very popular one, but we can ground ourselves. And that is a superpower I think we don't think about as such.
Exactly, because it's something that you can actually do. And a lot of times people think about something way out there, but also in meditating and everything, you can get way out there only in the sense of centering yourself and actually being focused. Like sometimes it's hard to believe until you're in there and doing it, and you feel a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're getting close to the end, and I'm curious, Ricardo, what is giving you hope right now?
What's giving me hope right now is the fact that people are finally talking. And it seems like one of the most simplest things of just using your voice and sharing. But there's a lot more to it. And when you are ready to be able to share, do so. But that's what gives me hope, is that a lot more people are finally opening up, talking, and not being afraid.
I love that. Thank you so much. And I typically end with a question that I think you already answered, but I am going to ask you. So my question is, what would you tell your 18-year-old self about resiliency?
I would tell myself that, for one, don't drink as much as you were drinking in 18. Just like hanging out with friends. I know I was under 21, but 18, whichever. Because, we're just hanging out after work or whichever. But for me, I would tell myself, kind of cut back on some of the hanging out and everything and focus more on what you really want to do, because you don't want to grow up and look up at the sky and think, man, I wish I would have done that back when I was younger. Mm-hmm. Instead, you want to be that person years from now looking up at the sky and thinking, I did it. I actually did it. That's what I would tell myself at 18.
Now, would your 18-year-old self have listened is the question.
I think my 18-year-old self would be freaked out. Like, what are you doing here? Where's the DeLorean? Where's the DeLorean at?
Right. And it turns out your superpower is time travel.
There you go.
Oh, my goodness. Ricardo, thank you. This has been such a great conversation. And I'm sorry to say we're going to have to end. But before we do that, how can our listeners reach you?
Your listeners can reach me all over social media, but simply there's one link that you can go to that has everything compiled in one spot, and that's links.co/WTT podcast. And that's links with 2 I's.co/WTT podcast. You'll find everything there. Thank you so much for having me on.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We'll put that in the show notes, and our listeners can reach out to you if they have questions or need your services. So, Ricardo, thank you. This has been so great. I'm so glad we got a chance to talk.
Same. Thank you. It was an honor.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. We'll see you next episode. Thank you for listening. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did. So if you'd like to learn more about me, Manya Chilinsky, I work with organizations to help understand how to create environments where people can thrive after difficult life experiences. And I do this through talks and consulting. I'm a survivor of mass violence, and I use my experience to help leaders learn about resiliency, compassion, and trauma-sensitive leadership, to build strategies to enable teams to thrive and be engaged amidst difficulty and turmoil. If this is something you want to learn more about, visit my website, www.manyachilinsky.com, or email me at manya@manyachilinsky, or stop by my social media on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks so much.